Hi, yeah. Hi everyone. So my name is Linda. I work in Zalando. I've been working in the mobile app for already 3 years. And today I'm here because I want to talk to you about AppCraft, which is a really nice tool we are building currently. And so let's start. So before I actually dive deep into AppCraft, I want to just present you what's the current situation in our app. So I actually chose these three screens that are like one of the three kind of most popular screens or heavily used in the app. The first one is our home tab, and currently we already have our home tab is already dynamic, the screen, and actually kind of when I joined we started working in a library that allows us to render this screen dynamically based on specific components, predefined components that we built in Swift. So for example, if you see the first screen, which is home, the first component there is a teaser, and we built other similar components. So basically, every time you open Zalando app and go to home, every day you might have like a different feed, different content there. So basically, yeah, this is the first library we built. It's called Flexible Layout Kits. And the second screen that we have here is the product detail page. And I chose this screen because it's one of the most complex ones. It has some complex transitions and also more complex layout, but also it requests or combines data from different data sources. So actually we have, for this screen, we had to build like kind of a specific way to loading data, so we can save battery, we can save memory, and this is one of the most important screens in the app. And the third one is a very popular one, is just a catalog. If you see in the top corner, in the right one, there is a small button for filters that you can apply to the catalog, and that's also actually another feature that is really complex in the app. So the current situation was that, okay, in home we already had like a tool or library that allows us to render content dynamically, so this changed really often, but it has some limitations. So for example, even though we had like specific components like teasers, like carousels, video, and different type of images, we weren't able to be flexible enough, for example, to be able to render the product detail page. Product detail page was a more complex screen that needed a bit more predefined or specific components, and basically we wanted to explore what else could we do, what do we need, or what the Flexible Layout Kit was missing to actually cover more parts in the app to render everything dynamically. So this will be a little bit like a. Is it working now?
Yeah.
So this can be quite long story. I will make it short. So last year, around like maybe 2 years ago, more or less, we started exploring different technologies. So in the team we were already, I think, like 10 or 11 iOS developers, and we were looking for different technologies that would help us to speed up the development process. So the first one we took a look, I think, because also it was kind of trend back then, it was React Native. And of course, like not many people in the team, iOS engineers, wanted to learn JavaScript. So I was one of the volunteers, and another lovely colleague from Android was also a volunteer. So we joined, only 2 developers, and we started to basically go through this learning curve of JavaScript, TypeScript, NPM, basically all this environment we need to learn for React Native. And initially we really liked it, you know, the live rendering, how easy it was to build like very complex layout really fast. We knew that we could also push updates over the air. This was really good. But then it became not so good because we had to integrate this into an existing app. So this was like already tricky. Like even in the iOS app, we had to go through a specific project to select the React Native libraries we wanted to add, have like custom scripts in the shared kind of code base that I had with Android. Also in some parts we had like different design for iOS, very specific. We have to kind of branch out, and in the end it wasn't that reusable as the technology was telling us. So actually another interesting thing that happened, we discovered another tool that you can use with React Native. I don't know if you heard of it. It's called Electro Native, and this is a tool that was built by Walmart Labs. And the tool is really, really complex. It's really good. It's supposed to save you a lot of headaches when you are working with React Native. It's supposed to speed up the updates and help you with, especially when integrated in an existing app. The downside of this tool that we found was that it's good for large organizations. It helps you when you have like different teams working on React Native features. But if you don't plan to add a lot of React Native features in your app, and in the end it just becomes so very, very, very complicated to maintain. And the screen that I have here is actually the experiment that we put live on the iOS app. This is the cart screen with the checkout part. And if you see, I really don't like it. It doesn't look like the original screen we had. And adding React Native plus Electro Native, collaborating with other teams, all the environments that we set up for a couple of months, in the end, doing this native, it was like really, like, we could have really done it I don't know how many times in the same amount of time. But the good thing is that we learned a lot of things, so I will talk about that later. So next step was, okay, React Native, we learned the pros, the cons, and then after that was like, okay, but how can we start to create something that we can build or render dynamically? So the very first experiment that I almost forgot, it was building a counter demo app, just basic screen with a text field with 2 buttons. You can add or remove, you can type something. So we said, okay, let's do it, let's compare different technologies. So we chose React Native, we did that screen with React Native, and then we explored also Flutter. So actually my Android colleague, he's like super good. He learned like Dart really fast. He built the same screen for both, and I just have to basically write the bridging codes between Native and Flutter for the iOS part. And Flutter, what was the problem with that? Like back then we didn't have like enough documentation for integrating it into existing apps. Plus, apart from JavaScript, learning again a new language like Dart, it was a bit too much for us. Basically, just from the point that we cannot integrate with the existing apps, it was okay, we don't look at it anymore. And then there was this another tool, really nice. It was Kotlin Native, which is another way how you can share codes like cross-platform. And what we did is that for this counter example, we had like some models, some structures. So we wrote them in Kotlin Native. We used this tool to generate a framework that you add in your iOS app. And from this, you basically access to these classes like in Swift. So basically transparent. So we did this experiment. So the basic domain model for Android and iOS, it was done in Kotlin Native. And the rendering part, the UI level, everything was like either iOS, like native iOS, or native Android. And this was like so, but since the point of the iOS developer that we didn't really share so much in the model domain logic, and adding another third party like framework plus Kotlin Native, it was really like not worth it at that point. And then we had another experiment, which is just like basic native. The domain logic, it has to be written in Swift, in Kotlin, and but we wanted to add some way to write layout like fast. So the very first version that I did for this same screen, it was using heavily like stack views. and the rest like that we know, like collection views, table views, etc. And in the end, we did a small experiment where we try to measure the performance of all of these options with the same screen, and native was better than most of them. Like in some point, like the rendering part, I remember React Native was okay, it was good. But since we already knew the downside, so we say, okay, let's go native. What are we thinking about here? So what do we learn from that experiment? I think both me and my colleague both we really like the Flexbox implementation in React Native, and we saw that we could still use it, which is like the yoga library with different third parties. So like I remember I was trying different ones. So I think it was UIKit. There was AysncDisplayKit or texture, and there were maybe one or two more that I tried. But I really liked that it was super flexible. I mean, I didn't want to also reinvent the wheel, because since the first library that we built, the flexible layout kit, we know that it was already complex to create everything programmatically, nested a lot of containers, measure, for example, the text height and propagating the size to another nested containers, and so on. So I already knew that it was a little bit painful, so I decided to try Flexbox libraries. And the other plus here, it was that my Android colleague already knew how it works. So communication between both of us, it was like really easy in this part. Both we were very interested into React concepts in general, like for example, patterns, reducer pattern, app state, high order components. We were talking about it all the time since we started with React Native, and we try to implement this in native in both platforms. We really try to go for it. This was a bit challenging at the beginning because this kind of architecture wasn't used in either Android or iOS, but we went for it. We were excited. This was a new project, and so we did it. And also, regarding integration with an existing app, we already knew that native was going to be really easy. We didn't have to add extra scripts or anything more complex. The cross-platform interaction is what I mentioned before. Since we had like small projects, we were only one iOS, one Android. Since React Native, I had to learn how to run the Android project, and my colleague the same for iOS. So we were also reviewing our PRs, and this was really good. I think I learned a lot from my colleague architecture skills. Also, he learned a lot from iOS, and at some point, I saw the code was basically like really similar, just different language. So we decided to start with native and with this new project, which is AppCraft. And AppCraft, it's conformed by different tools. So for example, here I mentioned Compass, which is the web tooling we have, and is the one we use to create the screens and also to add data sources and bind data there. Beetroot is basically our backend services. It's doing really complex things. It basically combines the screen definitions that are created in Compass, and also performs or takes care of all the data. So all the services that needs to connect in the fashion store or even external services, it combines everything and just gives us everything already digested. So apps just render what Beetroot gives us. And for the client side, we pick our names, but the Android framework that I started building back then, it's called Lbase, and the Android one is called Golem. And basically, if you will see later, but basically these two are just kind of browsers, so they don't know anything about what are you getting, an outfit or article. They just render UI. So this is a diagram, like very generic one, or these tools playing together. So everything, or the starting point is always Compass, which is our web tooling. It provides the screen definitions, Bitroot, which is the backend service, combines this one, connects to Fashion Store API, other API. At some point, I remember trying even the Spotify API just to render something in with these libraries. It worked really well. And the mobile apps, which is Lbase for iOS, Golem for Android. And basically, we read layout definitions from Bitroot, data, and every time, for example, if you need paginated data, we also call Bitroot for this. Every time we send tracking, we also, everything is through Bitroot. We don't do anything special. And I mentioned a little bit about the React patterns. So I actually tried to implement an architecture that was Elm-based. I didn't plan it from the beginning, but since I started applying like reducers, applying state, and also having my own set of components or primitives, what I call that is text, button, label, or list, collections. Little by little, I realized that I was very close to Elm. So since I already had a long way to go, I just decided to read more about it, learn a bit more, and just go into that direction, which Elm already solved a lot of issues I was facing back then in the very beginning. So in the Lbase architecture, the main manager here is the driver. It's basically just have a reference to the state, which is just a big model that knows every single thing that has to be rendered on the screen. I mean, components, style, actions, data that has to be presented on the screen. I had a virtual DOM model also for text for all these primitives, and basically a renderer which know how to translate this virtual DOM into actual UIKit, for example. In Elm, we have also commands, which is called side effects. So we call them every time we need to fetch something for Bitroot, for example. And this ends up in sending another message to the state, which will probably mutate it, and it will end up in a re-rendering of the screen if something changed. Another things about Lbase, the layout engine I mentioned before, we are using Flexbox. From the libraries I took a look, I chose texture, which is previously AysncDisplayKit. I liked the features of this framework because it builds the layout in the background. The layout is already declarative because it's basically CSS based or Flexbox. And it has a lot of nice features actually. Like for example, if you have different layers in your view hierarchy, you can actually blend some of them. So it goes to it works in a CA layer kind of part. And already mentioned architecture. Since it was just a different iOS framework, it was super easy to integrate in the main app, like not big deal. And like I mentioned, it was basically just a browser that renders JSON. And a lot of things, another like very important thing is that I mentioned already Compass. And of course, I work super closely with the developer. There are already 2 or 3 of them working on it, and plus my Android colleague. So basically, talking about Flexbox with 2 of them or 3 of them, it was kind of transparent. Like everyone knows already what it is, how it works. We didn't have to translate into iOS world or Android world. Like we already knew how new components should behave, what attributes we should support or not. So these are some of the basic components and events that I support or we support in Lbase at the moment. There are more of them, but these are kind of the basic ones. So for components, we have the flex, which is just basic container. Could be horizontal, vertical. And we have the primitive, like button, image, label, list, which is the collection. We have a couple of them more. And all of them also share like a style kind of model, which tell us basically just appearance. So background color, text, font, size, and so on. For all of these views, it doesn't matter what it is, even if it's a collection view or just container or label. We support these 3 events so far. So it's like everything is tappable. You can send or perform any action on any side effect or just updating app state on load and on scene. These 2 are most usually for tracking, but you can use them if needed. And I don't know if more than will come later, but so far this has been enough for us. And regarding actions, so far we have navigate to different screens when you tap on something, tracking. We can also perform mutations, like because GraphQL mutations or something like that. And probably also more will come later. So I want to talk a bit more about layout, how the layout part works in AppCraft. So to explain that, it's way easier just with an example. So let's say we have this catalog of outfits. What's the first thing, like, so for example, when we knew that we have to render this kind of view with AppCraft, the first thing we did is breaking down basically this screen into small components. So based that we have specific primitives in Lbase, what could we use there for building this screen? So for sure we will need like a root container, usually it's a flex one, but in this case it could be actually directly the list, it depends. And for each item on this list, we will need a combination of more primitives like image, different image to labels, maybe more flex containers. But to combine everything together, or the combination of all of those, we call them custom components. And it's something that we can reuse here, and we can reuse also in different screens. So for example, to break down this custom component, initially it's just like an example. What will we need? We need like a flex container, which is this light kind of purple in the background. And then we will need an image. We will need this button on the top right, which is this add to wish list. And interesting thing here, to build this, we will need in the style of this button and kind of position property, which will be absolute, and will tell you the inset how to position this child component related to the parent. On the bottom part, we have another container which is horizontal that has an image, which is this influencer image, the rounded one, and next to it, it has another container that holds these 2 labels, which is the influencer name and just the number of items for that outfit. So once you break down your component, then basically you have to go to Compass, which is the tooling that Frame is building, and here we have already some options. So these blue boxes that you see here in this screen are the components available. And these components can be primitive, so image, label, or button, or it can be custom components. So for example, if you built in the previous slide, I already presented the custom component, you just give it a name and then you can reuse it here. So apart from components, here you have to also configure data sources. I will explain this a bit later. We also have actions and functions, and I have more detail here. So the first one, components, I already mentioned, the blue boxes. The green boxes are the data sources. So for example, here if you need to load, I don't know, outfits data, you will have already some data sources or schemas already uploaded to Compass that you can just drag and connect this to your UI. I will show later on a demo just to make it more clear. Regarding actions, we don't have many at the moment. We only have like this navigate by tip link and the tracking one. And the gray boxes are functions, and these are just it's most in the Compass side and in Beetroot side, and these are just used for manipulating your data. Like for example, maybe from your GraphQL query, as a result you get an array of items, and you need to present in your UI like the number of items, specifically in a label. So you can, for example, use a count function there, and just apply maybe one localized string next to it, and then basically you can manipulate the data that comes from the queries and just put it in UI. So after you drag your custom layout, drag your data sources, which are the green boxes, and apply your functions to extract this data and put it on the screen, you will end up with a screen something like this. And this is Compass. They have this preview. Yeah, basically, after some time, this is what you get. So I want just to show you a little bit how it looks like, the response that we get from Beetroot after someone configures layout like that. Since it's gonna be a bit long, I just chose, for example, the response for these two labels that I have there, like in the blue box. And if you see here, we have always this component ID. At the first one, we have a type, which is a Zalando layout. This is the Flexbox component. By default, it's vertical, so we don't have to specify anything more there. And it has the two children, which are these two labels. And basically, for each label, we specify, or this is what we get from there. We get the font size. If there's a specific color, we get it from there. Like in the second option, with size 14, we have, I think, gray color there. The first one, we don't get anything, so default is black. But this is just an example. And if you see, we have there, after the type, we have an options property. This is mostly used for data. So for example, even like different components have different kind of options. In this case, for level, it's just text. And in this case, it might be used also as a placeholder. But I will explain a bit more later. So this is just an example. And this is basically how will be the rendering flow from the client perspective, the iOS perspective. So let's say it's iOS or Android, or Lbase or Golem, it doesn't matter. The first thing we do is that once we get a screen ID that was already configured in Compass, we go through Beetroot and we ask for a screen definition. After we get that screen definition, since we already know that we are rendering a collection or an image or a label, we can already show a placeholder for that. While that is happening, we render first we render the skeleton screen, and after that we request the data to Beetroot. So we do these two steps. After we request the data, or when we request the data, then Beetroot goes to different services, does what he has to do. If we need to show translation or localize strings, they will take care of it. So when we get data, we just basically have their binding process. When we combine the result we got from the layout, the result we get from the data, we combine these two models and we re-render the screen. And it will end up basically in the final screen with the contents and everything. So this is, for example, what we get from the requesting the data. So these is the same example, these two labels. In the previous one, in the layout, we got the component ID and all the styles for that label. And in this case, we will only get the component ID and basically the data for the text that we have to display there. So the first time, if you notice in the options one, we were getting sometimes placeholder. If this is optional, we might not get anything. But in the end, when we get the data, then we can render the final result. Okay, so this is going to be really fast, but this is just a demo of how to use Compass or what's happening there. So the first step is that we create a screen and we give it a screen ID, and this is the one we will use later. So this is basically a demo of the outfit catalog that I showed you, the screen I showed you before. And in Compass, like we have different options there. I already mentioned some of them. So the blue ones have components, data sources, actions, functions. So in this case, for example, the first thing we do, we have to drag the list component, which is a collection one. And we chose there, in that case, like the custom component, that in this case it was an outfit, the one I mentioned before. And we have some options there in the collection view so far. So we can either show, like, render like multi-column or a single column. So we have there the Zalando list in blue. Now we have to build the data source. In this case, is this outfits query, which is like GraphQL. And we need to extract information from there. So this is basically kind of representation of the GraphQL query. And we need to get basically images and more things. So the first thing that we have to do here is so the person that is creating this has to be familiar with the schema, first of all. And in this case, for example, we are using the gray boxes, which are those functions, to extract the information. So from edges, the green box, we get an iterator, which is just a kind of array. From there, we have like nested objects. So for example, from the iterator, we expand the not object. And if you see, we had there way more information. Curator is the influencer, basically. So from that, we also like kind of expand that information inside that object. And we get media, we get name, we get more information. And we also have to expand the media property, which is basically the one that has the list of images for that data. For that experiment, we are only using like the first image of that array, and we are connecting it to the image URL of that Zalando list. I didn't mention that after you drag the Zalando list, so you chose which component you want to render there, and then it gives you basically the inlets that you have to plug from the data source. So it gave me like outfit image URL, outfit subtitle, title, etc. So after the media images, I also expanded the curator, which is the influencer, also got media. I got the first image. I'm just connecting it to the UI. And this is the count function I mentioned before. So for example, we had list of products. We drag this count function, and the result, which is just a number, we attach it to the outfit subtitle, which is just a label. And after this part is done, we save. And we have to keep in mind which screen ID we created. So this is just a simulator. We have there like a menu just to launch deep link. So this is like an AppCraft deep link with the screen ID in the end. It was outfit catalog, the screen ID. And once you navigate to the deep link, you basically just use the Lbase framework and renders this screen. Just basically what I showed before. No again. I lost the notes. No. Okay, it's just the last part, so it's okay. So what's next? A lot of things, but some of the ones that I remember and are very important is the navigation. Right now the navigation we are handling in the main app, in the Zalando app, and basically toolbar and everything is taken care in the Lbase library. But if we want to navigate between AppCraft to AppCraft screen, we need to do something more. And also if we want a specific transition, like presenting something modally or with special like effects, also we need to do more work on that. Another very interesting topic we are working on it is stateful components. If you see the rendering part, it's not really complex right now. But what happens if you have, like for example, button that when you tap on it, it turns into red or green, the text changes, a lot of things changes at the same time. So how do we handle that kind of configuration from Compass? Or Beetroot has to do something for it, something we are like also taking care now. Conditional rendering also, like what happens if, I don't know, you get only For example, in the outfit catalog, what happens if you only get one? Maybe you should render something differently. So having also different or conditional rendering according to the data you get, that's another point we need to take care of. Right now we are using AysncDisplayKit or texture, like I mentioned before. We haven't explored so much animations in Lbase. This is another good opportunity that we have to take a look. And also, really nice thing or a point is the smart rendering. I mentioned we are using Elm, and we have like basic diffing so far, but it would be really nice if we can diff in a more deeper way, so we can actually re-render the minimum things that are needed. So for example, even if we diff the model, the components that changed that were added, inserted, or removed in the views, that's fine. But we need to also diffing at the style level. What if something changed and then, I don't know, just black change from black color to red, or I don't know, some aspect ratio change. So we have to be pretty smart into diffing what changed and just rendering what is needed. And basically just keep exploring our Elm implementation. Maybe I wouldn't say it's Elm, but it's really Elm inspired. So there are a lot of things we need to keep researching, implementing, while also trying to add more and more screen, more behavior to the library. Things are getting interesting, complicated, so I don't know, it's pretty interesting, the project. So basically, that's it. There are more things we need to explore, but that's one of the things, or the things that are more interesting to me at least. So thank you.
So we can have a couple of questions before the pizza break, if there is any.
What's the performance of the source compared to usual?
Can you repeat the question just so everyone?
So the question was, what's the performance of the solution compared to native?
Yep.
So actually, I have no, I don't have numbers right now, but I have taken a look of, for example, an outfit catalog implemented with Lbase, and also the one that this feature we already have it live also in the main app, and I don't see any difference so far. One of the concerns, or not concerns, or things that I wanted to prove is how AysncDisplayKit is working for us, since the promise is that it's rendering everything in background. And so far, scrolling behavior seems smooth. I haven't had any problems in terms of layout. I don't see right now that is any concern. I would say it's right now not noticeable if there is any drawback compared to native one. But of course, apart from these steps that I mentioned, there is already like performance that we need to work on, like, I mean, not performance, but monitoring. So we can actually take a look if specific layouts are kind of slowing down something. So yeah, there is also one of the topics we have to work on, monitoring and measuring performance. Every time also we make changes to the library, we have to check that.
I'm just curious about the navigation. You mentioned you have to do some extra effort to make it work. So what's the solution now?
Yeah, so currently for navigation, initially, like in my first draft implementation, I was handling navigation inside Elm, which was a little bit complex. So we decided to actually go live and, with something with quality and just well done. We decided to, for now, delegate the navigation to the host app or to the Zalando app. So right now, basically, navigation is done there. The routing for navigating between view controllers is done there. So basically, every time we need to render something with AppCraft, we either launch a tip link that opens a Lbase view controller, and so basically every time from there we need to navigate to other native screen in the app or so on. From the Lbase view controller, we delegate the routing behavior to the main app. So this is the current solution. But navigation also is one of the things we need to tackle later on.
Are you planning to do any open source?
That would be really nice, but yeah, probably it's really nice. But so far, we need to finalize a lot of things yet. So we need to explore a lot of stuff, layouts, animations. So when a couple of things are in place, then we can talk about that.
Is there an option to have a different layout for iOS or Android, or is it the same for every platform?
Okay, so the question was if it's possible to have different layout for Android and iOS. Right now, whatever you create in Compass is basically sent to both devices. We have another topic which is called A/B testing, or also like kind of conditional also rendering, where in this case, for example, Bitroot knows which device is doing the request, iOS or Android, and we can actually build, if the layout is really different, we can build separated screens, so with different screen IDs. But if we go really far with conditional rendering, we could even just share same screen and just basically do some checks, or in the Bitroot side to know which layout goes to Android, which goes to iOS.
Okay, let's do one more.
How much of the final app size is taken by AppCraft?
For the app size?
Yeah.
I think this I didn't have actually measured it. Right now we are more in like demo stage. We are planning to release the first version maybe in a couple of months, but so far I think we have built like a couple of demos installed on device. We didn't see, yeah, I don't really have the number, but I don't think it's really something significant.
Cool. So thanks for the talk.